The postponement of the attack on Iran for the fifth time, that is the latest decision made today by Donald Trump, a decision that made the whole world breathe a sigh of relief. Meanwhile, both the United States and Iran can freely go online and boast about their own victories. The U.S. claims that Iran had to beg just to be allowed to sit at the negotiating table. Iran, on the other hand, says the U.S. accepted all of its demands just to avoid further dharb. Both sides present very reasonable arguments. But objectively speaking, both the U.S. and Iran have already lost in this situation. There is no real winner. There's no need for all the arguing. The U.S. has lost too much money, while Iran has lost too many leaders. That's why, with the Strait of Hormuz reopening for 2 weeks, the real winners are the countries not involved in the conflict. Oil prices immediately dropped by 19%, and stock markets around the world rebounded. Vietnam's VN index even jumped by 79 points. These are the true winners, not the U.S. or Iran arguing over victory. Once a conflict escalates into violence, you've already lost from the beginning. The only question is, who lost less? If we try to directly determine a winner between the U.S. and Iran, it becomes very difficult, because it depends on each side's original objectives. If the U.S. goal was to eliminate Iran's leadership, then it has succeeded. But if its goals were to gain control over Iran's oil, change the regime, or collect fees from the Strait of Hormuz, then clearly it has not achieved them, so in that sense, it has failed. The same logic applies to Iran. Determining victory or defeat in war is never simple. As the saying goes, within victory lies defeat, and within defeat lies victory. Gain is loss, and loss is gain. Yin contains yang, and yang contains yin. Unless you use a clear metric like money, if we measure this as an investment, then the U.S. has clearly lost heavily. In just 5 weeks, it has reportedly spent around $31 billion without recovering any of it. So how can that be called a victory? As for the Strait of Hormuz being reopened, that's also not very convincing as a win, because the strait wasn't originally closed. It was the conflict itself that caused disruptions. Therefore, we may need to wait until the results of negotiations between United States and Iran in the coming weeks to truly judge the outcome. It is reported that the two sides will meet in Pakistan on April 10, a move welcomed globally, as both sides are finally showing willingness to compromise after 5 weeks of fighting. However, experts are still concerned. What exactly will they negotiate? And how will those agreements be enforced? Because there is a fundamental rule in life. Getting in is easy, getting out is hard. This doesn't just apply to war, it applies to everything. Investing in real estate is easy, but pulling your money out with profit is extremely difficult. Falling in love is easy, but ending a relationship is complicated due to all the ties involved. The same applies here. Starting a war was just a matter between the U.S. and Iran. But ending it now involves many other parties. Middle Eastern countries like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Qatar, many of whom actually prefer the conflict to continue. Most notably, Israel has no interest in seeing Iran peacefully negotiate with the U.S., especially given Iran's support for groups like Hezbollah. So, how can the U.S. control Israel's actions? And if it can't, how can any agreement be maintained? On Iran's side, the same issue exists. Even if Iran agrees to terms, how will it control its allied groups like Hamas or Hezbollah? Another major problem is, who will act as mediator? In normal disputes, a court enforces agreements. But in this case, who has enough credibility, power, and interest to mediate between the U.S. and Iran? Pakistan is not seen as a strong candidate. With a GDP per capita of only about $1,500, it lacks the power to enforce anything. If either side breaks the agreement, how could Pakistan possibly pressure them? Only Russia and China seem to have the necessary influence. But the question is, do they have enough incentive? End quote. From one perspective, China benefits if the US gets bogged down in conflict. Russia benefits from rising oil prices. So, why would they step in to resolve the situation? That's why the issue of finding a mediator is extremely complicated. Even though both sides have agreed to negotiate, experts remain pessimistic. The conflict now involves too many interests, and there is no trusted, powerful, and motivated mediator. Without those three elements, credibility, power, and interest peace will be very difficult to achieve.